Alright, what up boys? This may or may not be my 17th million time doing this video, but we're gonna go on with it. We're gonna get straight into these balance changes, and we're starting with Inferno Dragon. Inferno Dragon, I think, did need a nerf, because sometimes it is just really obnoxious. So its range has gone down 0.5 tiles, which is, you know, it's always good to have a range nerf, but the thing is, with this, it now can be knocked back. So, if you're not running Lightning, for example, you can now Fireball the Inferno Dragon out of his 3.5 tile range, and he's knocked back and reset. So I think this is actually a really clever nerf to Inferno Dragon. I think it's done really well. I'm a big fan of this one. So Royal Hogs, we're going to spend like 2 seconds on. First attack faster doesn't do anything. It's not going to be a meta card. This is useless. Baby Dragon, its hit speed goes from 1.6 to 1.5 seconds, and it can now be knocked back. Again, not really going to do anything. Baby Dragon needs a lot more than this, in my opinion. It's Splash, but is Splash really that good when it's a baby dragon that flies and has retired the targeting? No, not really. It needs a bigger splash radius, or you just fix splash II in general. Night damage goes up 5%, so I'm actually like really interested in this one. Why did they choose damage? Because damage was never the issue, right? We used to have a spell cycle deck that had Ice Wiz and Night was the only DPS in it, and then it was just spell cycle, because Night's DPS has always been good, right? We have Mini Packer, we have Lumberjack. They're like mini tanks that do good DPS. Why don't you just restore Knight's health to when it was good, and then it's good again, because Knight was never an issue. Ice Golem was the real issue, and then they nerfed Knight but gave half of it back, but now they're giving it more damage. I don't really know about this. I think Knight will obviously be good, but I don't like it because I think Knight's spot needs to be a tank spot opposed to a DPS spot. We'll get more into this later. As you can see, I have a Twitter tab open up here, which we'll get into. But we'll go into Tesla next. Its lifetime is now shorter. It goes from 40 seconds to 35 seconds. And then it gets a small DPS nerf of 0.1 seconds on its hit speed. So I like this. Tesla is obviously really good. You can literally just sit here and be like, I'm going to play a Tesla, and you can't attack because you're going to the Tesla. But you also can't defend because you're still going to the Tesla anyway. And I've just played 4 Elixir and it's your turn to move. And yeah, really not a fan of the 40 seconds. So 35 seconds seems better. And then obviously it needs a DPS nerf because Tesla is mad. So, along with this, they're now buffing Bomb Tower, so this is sort of like an alternative. Its Elixir goes down 1, which is a 20% buff, its lifetime gets shorter, which is 12% nerf, and its hit points go down 33%, which is a 33% nerf. However, you have to remember that its hit speed and its damage are exactly the same, so it still does the same damage output, but it went down 20%. I like this change, although I don't like buildings. I don't think it'll be OP, so I'm actually okay with this change, but I don't think we should try and get all of the buildings in meta, because buildings, that's why Tesla's so annoying, right? Like, the reason people complain so much about Tesla is because of the building. It has no negative side on its stats, because it just defends and doesn't counterattack. So if you use a Mini Packer, its stats are going to be lower than a Tesla, because the Mini Packer then goes in attack, so it's going to get more value. But because the defensive buildings just sit there and they don't go in attack, they don't have that tax on their stats. It just promotes like defensive gameplay, which I'm not a fan of, because you sit here and they just play defensive buildings, you're like, oh okay, I can't get through. So I'm sort of okay with them all being really obscure and not that great. So not a fan of the concept of buffing Bomb Tower, but hey, I don't think it'll be that meta with this. It still doesn't hit air, it still dies to all supporting units, it still doesn't counter many tanks. I'm fine with it. So talking of another building with that really ultra smooth transition, Cannon Cart lifetime is now longer by 10 seconds, which I like. It's going to lose that health a little bit slower as it sits there and just murders stuff. It transforms into Cannon faster, which I really like. It's a really good buff. It's how it should be. It shouldn't sit there and be like immobile for so long. And then it's now immune to knockback, which is like, it's actually a really big buff for it. So you see this a lot in pro events. If there's a Cannon Cart coming in, it has like half health, you can log it back and use the tower hits to make it die out of range of the tower, and then it doesn't do anything. So I like there's now immune to knockback. You can no longer just counter it with log. That's really cool. Talking of knockback though, Balloon now can be knocked back, which I like this buff. I'm sort of in the middle of Loon. I don't think it needs a stat nerf because it has a place in the game and it's not particularly really overpowered, but also, it's really obnoxious if your opponent's a real good Loon player. So the fact that it can now be knocked back is great, because you can, again, it's another flying unit that you can sort of counter with Fireball better. So you can just Fireball and it's now going to just fly off into the distance, essentially. So next up we have a King Tower change, which is really interesting to me. I'll explain why I think they did this, but let me just explain the change first. So, the King Tower is now going to do 7 more damage, going from 83 to 90, but it's still going to hit at the same speed, so it's going to hit at 1 second, and the Princess Tower's hit at 0.8 seconds. So it's essentially just a DPS buff to it. And the reason I think they did this is because so many people want nado buffed, although they don't want to buff nado, because nado in itself needs to be hard to use because it's such high risk, high reward. So they don't want to just buff the card and have it high reward for a lower risk. Instead, they're going to make it higher reward by making the King Tower stronger. So this is a buff to nado. I don't know if they've done this for nado, or if they've just done it for the king tower, because the king tower by itself is really weak, right? If you have like an RG on your king tower, it sits there for ages because the king tower is weak. But now this helps nado, because if you pull something to the king, it's now active, and if you pull it to the middle, it's going to do a lot more damage to whichever unit you're pulling to the middle. So I really like this change. I think it needed it because king tower was sort of weak. So to end off this video, hopefully for the last time I have to do this, we're going to read one of the TheRumHam's, well, 3 of the TheRumHam's tweets about Valkyrie. So the biggest feedback about the balance update has been the lack of changes to Valkyrie. We are looking at Valkyrie for next month, but the first step was to buff alternatives. Ice Golem, Knight, which has just been buffed, and Valk have all traded spots at the top of use rate charts. I like this, except I don't think you now compare Knight to Ice Golem and Valk because its damage is so much higher. I believe Valk still does more DPS, but Knight, I think they're trying to push it more towards the mini-pack or Lumberjack route, which I don't like. I think it just needs more health, because Ice Golem and Valk are both just really healthy units, and they're not really there for the DPS, they're there for the health. So I think you need to give Knight more health, not damage. So Valk's stats are now basically the same as Ice Golem before the nerf, and overall I think it's healthy for the game to have Valk in that spot than Ice Golem. I agree with this, because Ice Golem you can't counter it, but Valk you can, right? So Ice Golem just distracts your units, it gets a positive trade on it, boom, it's done, you can't counter that. Valk has to sit there and fight, which I like. As a troop, it's more troop interactions, which I know the TheRumHam's a fan of, and also you can counter this now. If the Knight buff does not even out the use rates, which it will even out a little bit more, but I don't think they'll be completely even, of the mini tanks more evenly, as I just said, Valk will get a haircut next month, which is good to hear that they're really looking at it, they know. So on this note, I don't think Valk needed a nerf because they buffed Knight. However, if they didn't touch Knight, I believe Valk would have needed a nerf. Remember, the difference between Valk seeing no competitive play and being highly popular is 7% health. So the correct number is probably between 2 to 5% nerf. It would be easy to overdo it in Return to Obscurity, which is not what we want. Let's see if Knight has his moment in the sun. I agree with this philosophy of balancing, just have all of the mini tanks just good and usable and viable, opposed to just nerfing them all. So instead of nerfing Valk, you just buff Knight, and then Valk has more competition in the form of Knight. However, I think they did it wrong, but overall I really like these changes. There's only 2 I disagree with, which is the Knight, which I just spoke about, and the bomb tower, because I don't really like buildings. But apart from that, I like them all. Please tell me what you think in the comments and in the poll that's in the top right, probably about now. But apart from that, that's the video over from me, and apart from that, boys, peace.